Good morning, everyone. As Michelle said, I'm going to talk about the role of public gardener-owner relations in the revival of the kitchen garden at Harewood. What we do in England, we call this stakeholder engagement or stakeholder relationships. And in its basic form, there is the project or the garden, and then there's the owner and the managers and the employees. And these are what we call internal stakeholders. And then we have the suppliers, the customers, the funders, the members of the garden or project, and the community. And these are known as external stakeholders. And there are many different stakeholder models that you can use for very different kinds of garden, very different style of project. And here I've drawn a very basic stakeholder model for the owner gardener, just to show relationships. So the owner has a strong relationship with the project or the garden, and the owner has a strong relationship with the head gardener. And the head gardener has a strong relationship with the owner or the gardener. So it's a two-way system. We sometimes call this communal or communal engagement, or just a communal relationship. And it's also known as buying in to a project, buying into an idea. So you need to get buy-in from your team, discuss plans and agree the way forward. So we call that a roadmap for a garden. The head gardener has a strong relationship with the gardeners, obviously, and the gardeners then buy into the project. The head gardener needs suppliers, and the suppliers then become part of the project. The head gardener also needs services. Everyone needs services, and services become part of the project. And the owner usually works through an agent. And the agent, therefore, is linked to the project. And the agent also relies on services. As I say, everyone needs services. The gardeners require skills, require training. So they are linked to the training provider. And as a stakeholder, the training provider is linked to the project. It could be specific training for the project. And then the gardens and the trainers are linked to networks, like the Wall Kitchen Garden Network, like the Professional Gardens Guild. And the owner is also linked to networks. And networks become associated with the project. So here, I'm going to attempt to illustrate a very basic stakeholder model for the public gardener owner. In general terms, if the project or garden is open to the public, then the public must be seen as a primary relationship. However, the general public are not necessarily classed as a stakeholder per se. Only members of the public who choose to engage with the project can be classed as stakeholders, but we don't know who they are. So this, of course, includes customers, and the public generally also includes the community. So if the public are allowed to interact with the garden or with the project, then the government is a key consideration for everybody, because they have legislations like health and safety, and that sort of thing. That makes them a stakeholder. And the customers and the community have a relationship with the head gardener and with services. And if the project is open or the garden is open even for a short time, there usually is a need for a marketing and PR team to promote the garden, to market the garden, to look at costs and look at ticket pricing, and obviously to help with public relations. And the marketing team has a strong relationship with the community and with the owner and the agent. For welcoming the public and hosting groups or events, and for providing refreshments, especially for a kitchen garden project, providing catering and hospitality is important. The catering and hospitality team have a strong relationship with facilities for cleaning the site, for maintenance, for security, maybe for toilets, car parking, those sort of things. Opening to the public brings many changes, many challenges too, and sometimes it's possible that some challenges may require expertise that is outside of the project team. And this is where consultants may be brought in to advise. These consultants may be architects, landscape architects, building architects, horticulturists, experts, health and safety advisors, or planning consultants. So that's the sort of model how we look at our stakeholder, who needs to be involved, who needs to be part of the project, and what things we need to consider for the project. So now we'll look at Harewood. Harewood has two main sites, Harewood Estate, which is privately owned, and Harewood House Trust. So Harewood House Trust is an independent educational trust. It's a charitable trust. It's a not-for-profit organization. So everything we make, all the money we make goes back into making Harewood better. It doesn't go to any person. It doesn't go to Lord and Lady Harewood. And it was set up as a trust in 1986 to preserve Harewood House, the collections, the grounds and gardens for public benefit. So the house is an accredited museum. It's a national centre for arts and heritage, an award-winning attraction and historic garden. So we run a diverse programme of indoor and outdoor events, exhibitions and educational activities for everyone. And we are committed to environmental sustainability, protecting biodiversity and championing equality and diversity. So the plan of the Harewood Estate here, the whole estate is 1,820 hectares. And in the centre there, you can see a small boundary with the lake and the red house there. That is Harewood House and the immediate grounds of Harewood House, which is the boundary of the Harewood House Trust. So the Harewood House Trust owns and manages all of the land and all of the buildings. It's basically the core historic part of the estate, and they manage that for the public and allow visitors. So here's an overhead photograph showing the house and the formal garden, the Himalayan garden, and the kitchen garden. And we own, the Harewood House Trust own half of the wall garden. And here is the south side of the house. So the view before was from the north side, and this is the south side with the Italian style formal garden created by Sir Charles Barry in the 1840s. The gardens are very diverse with a great many plants and special horticultural features. And the team requires a lot of skill, and there needs to be a lot of specialist knowledge in the conservation of historic gardens. So now we'll look at the history of the kitchen garden. And this is a plan of Gawthorpe in 1698, which was the house and the estate before Harewood, before it was named Harewood. Edwin Lascelles inherited the estate of Gawthorpe in 1753. So this is the Gawthorpe Hall, which is the medieval manor house. formal garden. Harewood Village is somewhere in this direction, just off the map actually. Harewood Church, which is a medieval church and was part of the old village of Harewood. And then we have the wall garden here, not built yet, but that's the site of the wall garden, and it was built from 1755. And Harewood House was built from 1759 to 1771, and then Gawthorpe Hall was demolished afterwards. So Harewood House became the new house at Gawthorpe. And the lake was created by Capability Brown in 1780 as part of his great landscape plan. And here you see a plan of the estate in 1796. And you can see the difference in the style of the landscape after Capability Brown has done his work. And you can see the wall garden. In this enlargement, you can see the kitchen garden, and then also many buildings and glass houses and a frame yard here. So utility buildings and hot houses and glass houses occupied in that area. So here are two plans from the archives in the 1700s. It shows a pine house on the left for growing pineapples, and a section showing the hot walls, how they were constructed and what the purpose of them is. So we'll look at some recorded history of the horticultural history of Harewood. So we have 1767 with Joseph Ismay, and he meets the gardener at Gawthorpe. So it's not Harewood yet, it's only 1767. But already he notices Madeira grapes and exotic plants, bananas, eggplants, Cape jasmine, palm trees, etc., growing in the kitchen garden. And he mentions the borders of the kitchen garden. And in 1799, Humphrey Repton visited Harewood and noticed sugarcane growing in the hothouses. He mentions the granadilla as well, which is the passion fruit, and this being the only place in England where the fruit was known to ripen, which shows the skill of the gardeners. In 1819, John Jewell noticed a stove garden and a fig house, the peach house, vineyards, conservatory, little pine house, and great pine house. So these were recorded for the first time in 1819. He also mentions that the pines, which are pineapples, were cut nearly 12 pounds in weight, and the grapes nearly 8 pounds per bunch. And then in 1830, the famous landscape gardener J.C. Loudon visited the house and the gardens, and he noticed 4 considerable hothouses for forcing peaches, nectarines, and figs. And also mentions a Calcutta house. This is the first time this has been recorded, a Calcutta house built purposely for pines. And he mentions that it's 80 feet long with a back wall of 8 feet. And then 1896, the Gardener's Chronicle of 25th of April did a feature about Harewood and said that it had the best example of Muscat of Alexandria in the British Isles. And they talk about the quarters devoted to vegetable production in enormous quantities, and that these were highly successful. So this is Gawthorpe Hall. This is about 1720. And this is the old house in the landscape. And after the improvements by Brown, you can see the difference. You've got the lake which separates the house from the kitchen garden, and of course a much more English style landscape. No field boundaries, no hedges or walls or fences, just one open rolling landscape. And here's a map of Harewood in 1844. You see Harewood House and the stables and the kitchen garden, and in this enlargement you can see the kitchen garden showing the glass houses and the traditional 4-quarter layout of the paths and the vegetable beds in the kitchen garden. Here are some early photographs of the kitchen garden at the glass houses, 1890s mainly, with the frame yard on the left, top left, and the vines being cultivated on top right. Bottom left, you've got a picture of the kitchen garden with the old glass houses, and on the right, in 1926, you've got still the old Victorian glass houses that were eventually taken down. And just some physical evidence as well of the history. The plaque reads that this vine was planted in the year 1788 and the house enlarged in 1839. And then you have the Gardener's Chronicle, the Gardener's account by J.C. Loudon, written. So some physical evidence and documentary evidence of the history of Harewood. We have the potting shed here, and really nothing has changed apart from some of the pipe work in 200 years. So we are looking forward one day to restoring this and opening to the public and having tools on display. And it'll be like walking back in time, like a living museum, but we will have gardeners working in there as well. Our archives also show the story of the head gardeners, the Harewood gardeners, in the Great War of 1914 to 19, and what they achieved. Also, who they were, how much they were paid, how many there were, how many gardeners. And this letter records some gardeners being recalled from active service on the front line to return to work in the gardens at Harewood. And the archives also show us what the gardeners grew in the kitchen garden in the Great War, all valuable for retelling the story and the social history of Harewood. And in 1922, the 6th Earl of Harewood married Her Royal Highness Princess Mary. She was the only daughter of George V, King George V and Queen Mary. And they moved to Harewood House in 1930 and began modernizing the house and the garden. I'm very pleased to say that someone carried out a survey of the glass houses in 1931 before the refurbishments. And this is a great guide for us to go back and look at archaeology in the future. Very valuable to have these. Here's a plan showing the proposed developments, removing all the former glass houses and replacing them with a modern range of glass houses, up-to-date modern glass houses. Some more plans. And then a new vinery in 1935. And here is the 6th Earl and Princess Mary at Harewood. And this was not long before the 6th Earl unfortunately died. And he died unexpectedly after an illness in 1947. So the Princess Mary was left on her own till she died in 1965. But because the wills were not exchanged within 7 years before the 6th Earl's death, sadly, the inheritance of the 7th Earl, who was away fighting with the Grenadier Guards during the Second World War, was heavily taxed under the death duties law. And it was taxed at the rate of 70%. And therefore, large areas of land and many properties on the estate had to be sold off to keep the state within the family. So between the 1950s and the 1970s, the kitchen garden was converted into a commercial business to help pay for the running costs. And this was mainly rose bushes and cut flowers produced on an enormous scale. Harewood House Gardens were open to visitors from the 1950s to help pay for the high running costs of the estate. And the house was still a family home, certainly for the 7th Earl and the Countess of Harewood. And for the 7th Earl, he lived there from 1930 to 2011. And the Countess lived there from 1967 to 2018. Now, having grown up all his life and enjoying the delicious fruits that came from the gardeners and from the glass houses, the 7th Earl really enjoyed them so much that he insisted that this tradition continued after he set up the Harewood House Trust in 1986. And Lord Harwood, he paid the trust the equivalent of a gardener's wages and a portion of the running costs to ensure that the employment was maintained in the glass houses and that he was assured good supplies of grapes, peaches, figs, etc. It had to be white-fleshed peaches, and everything had to be perfectly ripe, no blemishes, and the grapes had to be unwashed with the bloom still intact, and the figs and peaches had to be wrapped in leaves to keep them unblemished. For me as a gardener, this was not easy, but it was a thrilling challenge and one that I relished. What I loved most of all was the feeling that I was stepping into history, doing the same work, demonstrating the same skills as the old gardeners. And this was living heritage. In some cases, it was in the same plants, working on the same vines as those of my predecessors. So it wasn't acting, and there were no shortcuts, but the real thing and the proof was in the eating. So for me and my team, we grew a range of glasshouse fruit: grapes, peaches, nectarines, figs, melons, etc. for Lord and Lady Harewood, who, while also maintaining and developing the gardens for visitors. And we were able to piggyback off the fruit growing in the glass houses to use the heat to grow a range of exotic plants for the gardens, especially the terrace gardens. 6,300 tropical and tender plants were grown and planted in the flower borders each year. And this included canna, dahlia, salvia, hedychium, musa, ensete, brugmansia, etc. Conserving the vines and other glasshouse fruit was a specialized task, but we were able to use this as training for students in heritage horticulture. Very sadly, the 7th Earl died in 2011. We were able to keep a small number of the fruit growing tradition for the Countess for a few years, but eventually the glasshouses were starting to need expensive repairs, and I was told by the resident agent to stop work and to close the glasshouses. This was for safety reasons, as well as the running costs. Now, the impact was good for saving running costs, but not good for gardeners. And the loss of heritage skills included the management of grapevines, the training of peaches, the pruning of figs, the cultivation of exotic fruits, and the propagation of tropical plants. All of them were lost after the 7th Earl died and after the glasshouses were closed. And the negative impact on the garden included some gardeners resigned to work in other gardens. There was a reduced range of interesting plants. There were no tropical plants for the terrace borders. There was a reduced quality of the gardens, especially the terrace borders, given that visitors had been coming to see so many displays. It was a disappointment, especially to gardeners. And there was a result, was a reduced horticultural profile and status and reduced visitor satisfaction, and we were falling behind our competitors. Meanwhile, however, we were able to progress with the kitchen garden that we've been working on since 1994. It was, well, the kitchen garden was very untidy, very boring, and it had been closed to visitors for decades. And after initial tidying work, we progressed to revive the kitchen garden through a series of small projects to engage visitors and external stakeholders, members, volunteers from the community, schools, suppliers, and internal stakeholders such as the director of the Harewood House Trust, members of the family, staff and volunteers. And here are a few quick snapshots of our journey. So this is November 1995 with the community engagement through volunteers from the Bradford Industrial Museum, Heavy Horses, Norman and Rusty. And this was the first public event in the garden for decades. We held it over one weekend to raise awareness and to gain some publicity for the garden, whilst promoting heritage skills from other places. After the ploughing, we prepared the land and sowed grass, and we cut out new vegetable borders. And this was followed by the creation of Spiral Meadow, a land art installation, which was installed by Diane Howes, who was at the time Viscountess Lascelles. She is now the Countess of Harewood. So all those years ago, we formed a strong relationship to create the land art installation. In 1999, the wall garden was tidy and safe, still boring, but it was ready for opening to the public. And this caught the imagination of the family on art and cultural topics. And we also were able to get engaged with the resident family to get support and for recognition of the value of opening this space for visitors. And in 1999, still Spiral Meadow was open for public for the first time. There was a lot of play, there was a lot of nostalgia, a great amount of fun. There was art because it was a land art installation and a living sculpture, and people could walk back in time through the old English meadows. And it was a great feature to have in the kitchen garden until we were able to get the plans ready for development. Meanwhile, across the top wall, we created a bean border. And the bean border was really somewhere we could do vegetable trials and trial varieties. We also gained publicity through the kitchen garden magazines and various other radio stations coming. And it was a great deal of visitor interest in this and a lot of interpretation about the vegetables that we were growing. And we had the Harewood hops. We planted the Harewood hops in 2001. And in 2002, we produced a first-class product from the garden, which of course was beer. And we had wide recognition from Radio 4 food programme, national newspapers, and the beer was sold throughout the UK in public houses. Also in 2000, we developed the lettuce border. And the lettuce border trialed 50 different varieties of lettuce, many historic varieties. Now again, we got publicity through the Country Life magazine this time. It stimulated a lot of visitor interest and needed interpretation. And we also looked for sponsorship, and all of the seeds were donated by a seed company. Now, after 10 years, Spiral Meadow, it was decided to remove Spiral Meadow. It was becoming a lot of work for the gardeners as well. And maybe it was time for change after 10 years to make way for a new development. And this development came in the shape of a new kitchen garden. And January, February 2010 was stage one. A lot of work to take off the turf and to get the garden cleaned from the weeds. March 2010, stage two, bringing a lot of manure, organic matter to the beds. There wasn't time for us to dig, so we had to rotivate this into the soil. And eventually in March, April 2010, the new kitchen garden was invented really at Harewood, and this was stage three. And we went on through the various stages, sowing and planting. And in summer 2010, we saw the first crops growing in the kitchen garden. And by August, September, we were taking a lot of produce from the kitchen garden, and at that time we were still looking after the grapes and peaches, figs from the glass houses. So it was a lot of work for the gardeners, but a lot of diversity of things to grow. And in October 2010, we had the new kitchen garden shop, which started selling all of our produce. Most of it was going to the kitchens. And through the years, we just focused on producing higher qualities of fruit production. Sorry, of vegetable crop production. And then we progressed with fruit production, soft fruit, and obviously orchard fruit. And this was helped by introducing bumblebee hives to pollinate the strawberries and the raspberries, but it also pollinated the beans and all those sort of things. And we grew a lot of heritage vegetables in the kitchen garden, in the kitchen gardens over many years. A wide range of potatoes and root vegetables and glasshouse fruit. In 2018, there was an opportunity to do something to commemorate the Great War, the First World War, 1914 to 1918. So in 2018, we did an exhibition called Seeds of Hope, and we turned the kitchen garden into a wartime kitchen garden, growing many heritage vegetables from the time of the war, using invoices that we found in the archives and using seed banks and seed libraries to purchase the seed and to grow. And it became the most successful outdoor exhibition that's ever been held at Harewood. Very, very popular with the community. There was a lot of research involved and outreach into the community for their personal photographs, letters, and stories relating to the garden. And some members of the community had family who were gardeners during the First World War, and they came and showed us photographs and told us stories. So there's a lot of visitor engagement. So this is the kitchen garden in 2019. You can see in the center there we have flower borders as well, introducing flower borders to the kitchen garden. But a big change was we decided that organic matters and high quality vegetables were not enough today. You know, it's just people want to know where the food comes from, how it's been grown, and we needed to think about the environment and especially the soil food web. Given that we have manipulated the soil for 250 years in that garden, and now it was time to care for the planet. So we developed a no-dig vegetable cultivation scheme in the kitchen garden, divided the beds up into smaller units, and we grew a great range of flowers and vegetables through the no-dig system, just applying compost to the top of the surface. There were vegetables, fruits, herbs, edible flowers, and creative floral displays from the kitchen garden since 2021. And in 2023, it's exactly the same. And nowadays, we have a very good kitchen garden. It is run by a new senior gardener called India. She joined us in 2021, and she has really developed the no-dig systems, and also she has put up interpretation about the no-dig schemes so visitors can come and understand what is no-dig, why go no-dig. They can learn about wonderful worms, and they know about what is organic, so they can really learn from us, understand about what we do, but also learn from what we do and help them to care for the environment. So this is our kitchen garden journey so far. The next step is 2024, and stage 1 application for planning and funding to restore the glass houses. In 2024, we'll start stage 1. The glasshouse restoration will hopefully be completed, and a redesign of the kitchen garden by 2028 to 2030. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Trevor. Thank you very much. Thank you. So, questions? Questions? Yeah, maybe you can cut the share screen facility.
Michel, Rafael has asked if we can see the last picture again of the soil cycle.
Okay. So, sorry, Trevor, can you share the screen again?
Sorry.
Yeah. I'm sorry to have been...
That's okay.
So... Great. Is that this picture?
The soil food web.
Yep. Okay.
I have a question en français. Il y a une question à propos du sujet du jour. Je vois que vous êtes jardinier en chef maintenant à Harewood depuis plus de 20 ans. Est-ce que vous pouvez nous parler des relations que vous avez avec les propriétaires?
Yes, so there is the 8th Earl and Countess, and when she was Viscount, the Countess developed the kitchen garden, and I have a very good relationship with the Countess, and both with the Countess and the current Earl. So the Countess was more involved with the wall garden, with Spiral Meadow, and the 8th Earl, we have worked very, very closely together on the Himalayan garden. The Himalayan garden contains a stupa, which is the only one of its kind in any garden in Europe, a very special feature. and myself and the 8th Earl worked very well together on the creating of that garden. So in general, they're very, very nice people. I get along with them very well. So there's a very good relationship there. But the Harewood House Trust has a director and a co-director, and they manage the conservation and preservation of the gardens and bring in consultants from time to time to oversee that work.
Okay.
Does that answer that okay?
Yeah.
How many
thank-
visitors do you have? How many visitors do you have, Trevor, on average per annum? Yeah, I think you had many more when you organized Seeds of Hope.
Yes, I think on average, I think about 275,000
And for Seeds
on
of Hope,
average. I think it went up to 315,000 for Seeds of Hope.
Wow.
okay.
Very
So,
very popular because we're very well located. We're on the edge of a conurbation, which is Leeds. We're not far from York, and Harrogate is only 6-7 miles away.
okay, Trevor, Jean-Jacques Lescure asks, no dig, what about the yields? What are the yields like compared to former production methods using no dig?
Well, the yields are heavier with no dig, simply because you have the facility of growing small modules, vegetables in the glass house, and you can easily successional sow and plant for the bed. So the yield per bed per area is heavier because you might have 2 or 3 crops. So you might have a first crop, you might have a catch crop, which grows either between. So if you put some potatoes in, you can grow radish over the top of those on a mulch before they come up. But you can also sow and grow all the time in the glass houses to put in more afterwards immediately. In fact, if I go back to this slide, you can see here, if you can see my cursor, this is where these 2 beds were where the potatoes were grown, and the potatoes were grown under a sheet of fiber. So they weren't dug into the ground. So we simply put compost on the ground, put the fiber over the top, made holes or slits in the fiber, and put a potato underneath the slits, and then put some compost over the top to keep it moist so it didn't dry out. So the potatoes grew on the ground underneath the fiber, and we simply rolled the fiber back. You can see them there. They're still rolled back. And India has immediately planted in again with fennel, and this is, I think, a what do you call it? Endive. So that's a very quick system. So already she had plants grown in the glass houses ready to go in the compost. So we didn't have to sow again.
Wonderful. Thank you. And Kate Nichols' question, do you think no dig system saves a lot of labor? I think you've just answered that at the same time.
No, it doesn't save labor. But it saves unnecessary labor. It saves the weeding because you're mulching and you have less. You do have pernicious weeds that come up through, but you have less annual weeds if your compost is clean. But you have to manage the compost well. And at the moment, we don't have, we're not there yet. We're working on our compost system. We need both 2 things. We need a proper compost system where we have finished compost that is weed-free, sterile to go on the beds. But we also need enough of it. And we don't have enough of the compost yet. But we're building and building. So we have to rely on the place called Yorganics, which is an organic recycling plant in York that recycles municipal waste. So in the circle, it's encouraging gardeners to recycle their garden waste. They pick it up, they put it in a big yard on windrows, and they compost it down. Then you can buy it in bulk, so it doesn't have to go into plastic bags, and you get one visit, and you get all the compost you need. Absolutely hundreds of tons of it. So it's good system.
Thank you. Gila has also asked, what would the annual budget for the maintenance of the garden be at Harewood?
The annual budget for the maintenance. You mean for with the gardener's wages and everything?
Yep.
Yeah.
I think somewhere around 200,000.
Thank you.
Everything all in. We're always asked to keep that down to a minimum. So we have quarterly reviews. So we might start off with a budget of somewhere in the region of 200,000. And sometimes if the visitor numbers aren't coming through very well, we have a budget review. And sometimes by the mid-review, we're asked to come back 10% or 20%. So we try to spend as much as we can early on seeds and plants.
Lovely, thank you. A couple of questions from Sumintra and Devon. The first one is, did you take the glass out of the glass house where the sunflowers are, or had it already gone? And she's also asked, your plan shows rows planted diagonally like they do at Knight's Hayes. Is this successful?
Yes, it's successful. The first question was about the glass houses. We paid a lot of money for someone to come and take that down. Obviously, the glass houses were in a fairly poor state of repair, so they weren't very safe to climb on. So it cost a lot of money for someone to come and take the glass away safely. And that was so that we could have school children and school groups in the garden, because every time it was windy, and if they were here, we couldn't have the visitors or the school groups in. So we decided that we'd better make it safe for visitors in that kitchen garden and take the glass out.
Thank you. Alex, there's a message in French from Benoit d'Hotel. Have you seen it?
Ah oui, le message en français dit bravo pour vos agencements de couleurs. Comment travaillez-vous les choix chromatiques et les mélanges de couleurs? Les choix par saison ou par zone, quelle que soit la saison.
Have you got?
Thank you very much. Yes, we like devising colour schemes on the terrace gardens. Lord and Lady Harewood never liked yellow on the terrace. So the terrace is all from the blue spectrum. So a lot of reds from the blue spectrum, no scarlet, but the blue spectrum red, and pinks and whites and mauves, a lot of blues and lavenders on the terrace borders. That is because they used to live in Harewood House until 2011, and they didn't like to look down on the parterre and see yellow. One exception was the Tour de France was launched from Harewood, and we had yellow to signify the yellow jersey. For the first time we were allowed to do that, I think 2016. And then in the archery border, we have very hot colors, subtropical colors, a lot of hot reds, hot pinks, burnt orange, all of those there. And we just like working with contrasting colors as well. So we're good, vivid colors. And India, of course, it has an arts background. She is a colorist and likes to devise different color schemes.
Lovely. Benoit has just commented, pas de jaune au printemps, So no yellow in spring?
Not on the parterre, no, it blue.
Blue.
Yeah.
I think one more. Oh, there's a question. How many years does it take to build an effective compost system?
Well, it's probably going to take us about 4 years from now, really, to get a proper system. We need, because we have to go by legislation, so we need to produce that amount of bulk, we need a concrete base, and we need a drainage system, and possibly a reed bed, because you can't allow the effluent from the compost to flow into the drains or into the natural water system. And so, because the wall garden slopes down to the south, it could go into the lake, and that's one of the reasons why I decided in 2020 to go no dig. So 2021 we would have no digging, because when you dig the soil, when you rotivate the soil, it makes it really good for the tilth and for sowing and planting. But it's because it's so fluffy, when it rains, all of the silt particles gets washed down into the drains, and the drains go into the lake, and the lake becomes silted. And of course, we're losing soil, so through the wind. And so the environment is a key thing when looking at the compost heap. We need to make a model. And I went to Brodsworth Hall on a gardener's day, a head gardener's day, to look at compost systems there. So we're going to be doing some research first. It's very important that we don't harm the environment in trying to create an environmental garden. It's, as I say, it's the runoff from the compost, from the decomposing vegetables, that is a poison.
Thank you. Ian Toffler.
Last question, maybe? Last question?
Ian has asked if there are any grants being applied for to rebuild the glass houses.
Yes, we are in talks already with the Heritage Lottery Fund. They're interested. We have also in August, we appointed a head of development. So the Harewood House Trust appointed a head of development, and it is her responsibility to find funders and sponsorship for the wall garden. Obviously, we're actually working all now and today. Actually, after this webinar, I've got to go to a meeting because we're working on a landscape master plan. There's a lot of funding needed for that, a lot of match funding, and we do get some money from the family, from the estate, as a donation, but it is for projects and for improving and helping Harewood to be a better place.
Thank you, Trevor. Michel, I'm sorry, I have to ask the last question from Nathalie Romati.
Okay, so
And the field
please
mice.
go ahead, Natalie.
And the field mice.
The field mice.
How do you cope with field mice if you use no dig?
No dig.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I don't know where they've gone, but we had a lot of field mice in the spiral, and maybe they took hump and have gone. Maybe we've upset them and they've gone somewhere else. Maybe they've gone to some other garden. But yeah, we don't have field mice. Well, we maybe have some, and there were some burrowings under the matting, because of course the matting went down in, I think, end of March. Well, actually, we put the matting down first so that the soil would heat up, and then in April, we put the holes in and put the potatoes in after April. And when we peeled it back, much to our amazement, there were thousands of worms, thousands of insects, but some little mice burrows, but not very many. I was wondering actually whether we'd find that the potatoes have been nibbled.
Okay.
I'll pass on the final comments to Trevor. I'll just save the chat. Thank you, Gila, for your comment.
Okay, so this meeting has been recorded, so you will be able to listen to the recording again. and also let's say we'll post the presentations on the site as well. So I would thank you very much, Trevor.
Thank you.
Thanks for very interesting journey in time in Harewood. Great presentation, great work there, and thanks again, Natalie, for your presentations.